Welcome to the 2020-2021 Chester County Historic Preservation Network Virtual Heritage Series on the third Thursdays, live at 5. Our network is dedicated to protecting, preserving, and promoting the historic resources and cultural landscapes of Chester County. Tonight's program, the John Evans Estate on the White Clay Creek Preserve, will explore this fascinating structure. Now, let's meet our moderators and panelists.
I'm Suzanne Amrich, and I'm a board member with the Chester County Historic Preservation Network.
Hi, I'm Tim Caban. I'm also a board member of the Chester County Historic and Preservation Network, and Suzanne and I will be the moderators. Now I'll ask Senator Dinniman to make himself known.
I'm Andy Dinniman, the state senator, and the White Clay Preserve and the John Evans House is within my own district. And this is a treasure in Chester County that we need to protect.
Hi, I'm Karen Marshall. I'm Chester County's Heritage Preservation Coordinator. I'm glad to be here this evening.
Hello, I'm Eileen Parrish. I am the chairperson of the London Britton Township Board of Supervisors, and the White Clay Creek Preserve is almost totally in London Britton Township, so I'm delighted to be here this evening.
Hi, I'm Cliff Parker. I'm the archivist of the Chester County Archives.
And I'm Jim Martin with the London Britton Township Historic Commission. And I wanted to give you an overview of what you're going to be watching. Try to imagine yourself as we go through this, what life was like in 1700. No electricity, no roads, no maps, all woods, and some Indians now and again. And only their Indian trails to find your way around. How many times do you think you'd be asking yourself, why did you come here in the first place? Welcome to this presentation on the John Evans Estate located in the White Clay Creek Preserve. This preserve is part of a major tri-state park system that encompasses over 13,000 acres that are interconnected with numerous trails within Pennsylvania, Delaware, and Maryland. All three parks had their start with the DuPont family. This story starts in the late 1600s. Native Americans have lived in Chester County and London Britton Township for over 13,000 years. The earliest inhabitants in the area were the Lenni-Lenapes. In the White Clay Creek Valley, there were two settlements, Indiantown and a smaller summer camp known as the Mini Site. This would mean the John Evans family and the Welsh Baptist community surely coexisted with the Lenni-Lenape people. The sites were excavated in the 1950s and in 2005. Important artifacts have been uncovered and housed at both the University of Delaware and the Pennsylvania state capitol. In March 1681, King Charles II met with William Penn to settle a debt that the king had with William Penn's father. Having never been in the New World, the king used a map similar to this to give William Penn land that would settle the debt. William Penn got on a boat and arrived in the New World in 1682 and established contact with the Lenni-Lenapes and had an agreement that the lands between Delaware River and the Susquehanna River could be used by the Europeans. There is a bronze tablet recording this event in the preserve. William Penn's Charter of Privileges drew Welsh Baptist settlers, including John Evans Sr., to the area with the promise of religious freedom and the right to participate in their own governance. The Welsh Baptists and John Evans first came into the area around 1700. At that time, there were no roads, just a lot of trees and Indian trails. John Evans Sr. founded the Welsh Baptist community in the early 1700s, which later became London Britton Township in 1725. This reflects a distinct exploration and settlement pattern related to the freedom of religion by the Welsh Baptists. Since neither the King of England nor William Penn had ever been to the New World, they had two different ideas of what the land grant encompassed. The dashed lines on this map represent what the king gave to William Penn. William Penn, on the other hand, thought that he had access to the Chesapeake Bay and the Delaware River, which meant the southern border for Pennsylvania was down around Baltimore, Maryland, and the northern border was at the Canadian line. It took 240 years in the court system for the line to be settled, and today we know it as the Mason-Dixon line. The Welsh Baptists began coming over in 1682 along with William Penn. Everybody would have to get off the boat in Newcastle before they would continue upstream to Philadelphia. The belief is some people stayed there and settled in New Castle County, Delaware. A lot of the Welsh Baptists went to Pennapack in northern Philadelphia, which was their first Baptist church, and then migrated down into Delaware to help form the Welsh Track meeting house near Iron Hill in outside of Newark, Delaware. That's the route more than likely taken by John Evans, who then migrated north from there. Keep in mind, all this was happening in the late 1600s. You have to ask yourself, why would your family agree to move to the New World? The answer was kind of simple. The King of England was going to throw you in jail with your family if you didn't swear allegiance to the church. Since William Penn was a Quaker, he had gone to jail in the 1670s. Matter of fact, he was in the Tower of London because of his beliefs. Also, William Penn and Lord Baltimore, who was Catholic, were told that their claims were only good if the tenants swore loyalty to either party. Meanwhile, Lord Baltimore sent his sheriff to the northeast corner of Maryland to force families off the land if it were not granted by Lord Baltimore. This didn't stop at the border. It went on for decades. Since the Quakers did not bear arms, William Penn went to other religious groups to build a wall of landowners that were loyal to William Penn on his southern border. One of the first grants, penny acres, went to Welsh Baptists that included John Evans in 1700. This was immediately followed by another 30,000 acres in northwest Delaware that went to the Welsh Baptists. Finally, in 1714, John Evans found the White Clay Creek and bought 100 acres and realized that he could build a raceway from the western branch of the White Clay Creek to the main branch, and that would provide sufficient water power for his new mill. It is important to note that in the early 1700s, there was a great demand for flour in the West Indies. Also, John Evans' mill was only 12 miles from the shipping ports in Newcastle, Delaware. What more than likely began as a log cabin eventually became John Evans' house and his mill on the White Clay Creek. By 1725, the Welsh Baptist community had grown to the point that they formed the London Britain Township, and the John Evans family donated the land for their Baptist meeting house. This is the sexton's house, built in 1830. The sexton was the gravedigger and the maintainer of the graveyard. and now the current state of the John Evans House. We feel this place matters. For the following reasons.
Thank you, Jim, for that. And now we'll ask the panelists some questions that were submitted. Could each of you explain your connection to the John Evans estate and the White Clay Creek Preserve?
Well,
Could you repeat that question?
Sure. Could you each explain your connection to the John Evans estate and the White Clay Creek Preserve?
Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, this what you just saw is the White Clay Creek Preserve John Evans House, and what it's evolved to over the past 300 years. The first video was taken in 2017, and later that year, the arsonist set the house on fire, and the result was what you saw in the last video.
Let me add that it's important both to save the land, of course, but also the historic structures that are on that land. Because if we're going to understand the life that existed in the 1800s and beyond, you need both. It's the interaction of people with the land and the structures that they built that help us understand and tell the story of Chester County. So my involvement came when Mr. Martin and when others came to see me concerning additional funding from the state for the John Evans House. I knew of the White Clay Preserve, but I had not really explored it, and nor had I been at the village itself. And it was a marvelous experience. And based on that, I committed to assisting as much as I can, since the park through the state DCNR has responsibilities. And it's one of the treasures we simply need to protect. So that's my connection.
Anyone else?
My connection is through the township, both with the beginning of our historical commission back in 1991, and then my service on our board of supervisors here in London Britton Township. And we truly feel that the preserve is a treasure, and we feel incredibly blessed that for the most part, the White Clay Preserve is in London Britton Township. It really encompasses just over 30% of our entire township. So we're extremely fortunate in that way. And the Evans House, being perhaps, from what I'm understanding, and I'll certainly stand corrected on this, may well have been and be the oldest house in London Britton, since the township wasn't incorporated until 1725. So we're very supportive of this preservation effort. and are thankful to Senator Dinniman's office for helping us to get some grant money to begin the effort of looking at how the what's left of the house can be stabilized, which is extremely important right now.
I'm Karen Marshall. I'm the Heritage Preservation Coordinator for the county, and my job is to work with our local organizations and local municipalities and encourage preservation. And I was asked about 1.5 years ago to present to the Friends of White Clay Creek, and just to talk about how preservation is done in general in Chester County. And this to me is one of the wonderful Chester County stories where a group of concerned citizens have accomplished essentially the unaccomplishable. I mean, they've got together shortly after the meeting, began meeting, gathering historic documents. Jim stepped forward in terms of leadership, and Senator Dinniman was brought into the story, which immediately raised everybody's awareness of what was going on. And what had looked like a hopeless situation, you could all see in that video, the house was in deplorable condition. I don't know if it looks better burned or as it was, Jim. When I was looking at the video, I thought maybe it's an improvement. I should, only that it was just in such terrible neglect. And this group of citizens and our elected officials, Eileen and Senator Dinniman, have made this a priority within the state, whereas before it wasn't. So I'm just delighted to be working with them. And now we're working on the National Register nomination for the district to make sure that the state and the federal government recognize its importance.
My name's Cliff Parker. As I mentioned, I worked at the Chester County Archives, and I became involved through Karen for the past, over 5-6 years now. We've been working on mapping the county for the Battle of the Brandywine project. And as a side project, basically last spring, late spring, she asked me to map London Britton Township, and on top of that, to trace the property of the Evans family back in time. That project expanded and ended up becoming a report that runs through the founding of London Britton Township, with a specific focus on the Evans family.
And you may wonder about me. I'm the only one in this group that didn't major in history or any of those things. I came out of the private sector, and I just couldn't believe the history that I found down in the preserve that no one seemed to be paying attention to, and volunteered.
Sorry.
Well, thank you, Jim. Everybody plays their part. I want to read one comment that came in on the chat, and then I'll ask a question for everybody. The comment is from somebody whose name is Deb13, who says, "I appreciate this webinar immensely. I lived in the house from 1981 until 1992. It breaks my heart that it was allowed to decay and then burn." So I don't know whether whether she agreed with Karen or not with her comments there, but notwithstanding, here's a question for everybody. Of all the things that you learned in about this project, this property, what stands out the most?
Well, for me, what stands out is the facts of the Baptist Welsh track, and the Baptist being part of the history. For many of us, we think of the history of Chester County in two ways. We think of the Quakers, and we also think of the, later on, of the various German groups that came here. But I had not really known very much about the Welsh Baptists. But the bottom line is all the groups came here for one reason, and that reason was religious freedom and tolerance. And perhaps, so I learned about the Baptist tract more than I knew. And I also saw how today we have an obligation to maintain that tolerance and the notion of religious freedom for all, because it really began here in Pennsylvania and began here, right here in Chester County. And the Welsh Tract is part of that wonderful history. Remember that when Penn founded Pennsylvania, this was the first place in the world. When he, in the great laws, I think it was of 1697 or 98, which established the colonial legislature, but it was also the first place, first statement on the importance of religious freedom. So I learned more, I learned about the tract, and I saw how it related to our history.
Well, I'll go next. For me, you know, there were so many interesting facts that I came up with doing the research. But what stands out for me is that we call this the John Evans house, but there was the wife of the John Evans, the second, Jane Evans, who was really instrumental in the success of the mill and the development of the township as the whole. You know, when when her husband, John Evans II, there's a ton of John Evans in this family tree, died. He was barely 40 years old. He left her with 6 children, over 1,500 acres of land to basically manage, with all the tenants involved with that, a merchant mill and a grist mill. And she also had time to take her neighbors to court, to sign petitions for establishment of taverns, and petitions for roads, and she managed to raise sons that became doctors and lawyers. So, you know, she was a remarkable woman, especially when you consider in the 1700s, women had very little opportunity for education and for improvement.
The thing that got my attention was the different history tracks that were in one location. You had the Lenapes there for 13,000 years. You had the Mason-Dixon line, which went on for 240 years, thereabouts. You had the migration path of the Welsh Baptists. And this is all occurring within a short hike, I would say probably 1 to 2 miles of the John Evans house. I think there's more history here that needs to be investigated to have a better understanding and appreciation for what we have.
I guess I would say that moving to London Britton Township and buying a piece of property that was originally owned by one of the peers of John Evans, Richard Whitting. He was the first constable of the township. So I'm quite sure that in my imagination, he was a friend and fellow early resident of the township. And it's just fascinating to be a part of all this, to live here, and also know that because of the preserve, so much of this history that we're all talking about has been set aside and preserved, that it is not built upon. And a lot of that has to do with, again, early activists in London Britton Township and elsewhere, who kept a dam from being built along the White Clay, and allowed that the preserve became what it is today, which is, you know, a wonderful part of history that is going to be with us. Because if that dam had been erected, everything we're talking about right now would be at the bottom of a reservoir. None of this would be here. So I mean, the whole idea of what was saved and what we can still do with what remains, to me, is just remarkable. It truly is.
I guess for me, it was learning that we have a township in the county that was established solely for Welsh Baptists. I love the founding story, and the evolution of the founding of the migration of the Welsh Baptists from Delaware. I didn't know that much about this part of the county. I knew that Eileen had had a historical commission that functioned for a very long time and had done a lot of work. And then I knew when I came onto the county that they were no longer there. So I didn't have any place to go to really learn more about the intersection. You can't help but come into the White Clay Creek and drive down to the intersection where the Baptist church is and wonder what happened here. What is this? And so I've been just having a wonderful time watching the story unfold and watching the township once again vigorously get into their history. And I think that the point that Jim's making and what he's done is we've never had a place in the county to talk about the Mason-Dixon line. And this is an opportunity. If we can develop an interpretive site here, these multiple layers of actually nationally, stories of national interest may finally be told.
We're getting a lot of.
Could I just ask real quick, Suzanne? Jim, are you in touch with the young woman who said she lived in the house? Because if you are at all interested, I don't know if you're still on, if you have family photographs from when you lived there, they're wonderfully helpful for any restoration efforts.
We're getting a lot of wonderful questions and comments on the board, so keep them coming and we'll answer as many questions as we can. With regards to Deb 13, we did get a question of when was the house last occupied. I don't know if Deb was the last occupant or not, but.
The last occupant was about 1999. There was a major flood in the White Clay Creek area. And as a result of that, the people were flooded out and never, the state didn't continue to rent it, much less repaired after that.
I will also say that when Deb left in 1992, one of my, at the time, young son's classmates and his mother rented the house. And I remember taking our son there for some play dates in the early to mid 90s. So they were probably the next residents before those last folks that you mentioned, Jim, I think.
Okay. Why is there so little information available on the Native American story as it relates to the John Evans estate within the White Clay Creek Preserve and other areas of Chester County?
The simple and unfortunate answer is that we don't have the primary source evidence needed to reconstruct that history. In the archives, we use written records to interpret the past and to understand early Chester County history. Basically, every assertion or fact we present is backed by a primary document. By that, I mean things like taxes, deeds, wills, court records. But the Lenape, or the Delaware tribe, did not leave behind a paper trail. They basically relied on oral histories and traditions. And then you factor in the fact that our written history of the county only really begins in 1681. And because the Lenape existed outside of the government, which means basically the laws that were created within the province, even if they dealt with the Lenape, it was basically on what colonists could do or how they could interact with them. So that means their appearance in our records are limited. So you combine all these factors, it's just very difficult to relate their story as it specifically relates to London Britton Township.
But this also presents a good challenge. I mean, by training, I'm an historian and taught at Westchester University many history courses. And there are groups of people who didn't leave necessarily written records, or whose histories were limited and lost. And we just have to attempt as historians to be as creative as we can. For example, we have learned a great deal. If you look at some of the work on the period of slavery, it is through the stories of the folk traditions, the symbols, that we begin to understand what life was like from the point of view of the slave, because many slaves were not allowed to read and write. I mean, there were exceptions, as Frederick Douglass, who wrote his story, was just crossed down a bit in Maryland. And then Frederick Douglass, of course, was a frequent visitor to Westchester, actually, after he had escaped from slavery. So what Clift is saying is correct. It just means that the challenge becomes more for those of us who want to study the past as to what kinds of sources are available. And that's one reason you preserve structures as the Evans House. Now, that could tell you much about the Indians, but it does provide us with how everyday life was lived and how the structure was put together. So the land, architecture, symbols left on the land, artifacts are sometimes all we have to put together the past, and it requires a greater effort and a greater creativity than because you're using non-written primary sources now, which are more challenging. But it's well worth the effort.
I think also somebody had pointed out to me that back at this time, this is before the revolution, there wasn't a lot of trust in the King of England and his representatives. And so they didn't necessarily record everything that they did. A lot of records weren't established back at that time. They really didn't start appearing for another 50 to 100 years.
It is interesting in this regard that in this, there are very famous paintings in the Senate chamber done by Violet Oakley, who was the first woman ever to get a government commission. And it's on the history of Pennsylvania. And one of her paintings, the paintings begin with the interaction of the settlers and the Indians. So it is part and parcel of who we are as a Commonwealth.
Okay, I'd like to read one comment that came in that I think would add to this. So from Kathy Sylvester, she says her grandfather, Bruce Woodworth, was, she believes, the last owner to operate a mill on the property. And her father, Douglas Woodworth, lived there as a young man. He passed away in 2016 at almost 100 years old. So clearly, a lot of people on the chat have a tie to the building at different points along the way. Here's a question again for everybody. If money was not an issue, what would you like to see happen with this area?
Well, one thing, we don't want it developed. It seems to me, yet if you have such a beautiful historic site, an important historic site, and Jim is quite right with the levels of history going through traveling the same trails, and also our supervisor, Ms. Parrish, is right about the importance of the history. Then what you want to do is to make sure that you reconstruct as much as possible the estate where it is, have some interpretation for visitors who come in, and create this area so that more can go there and experience nature and actually experience the same scene that people have experienced all the way back to the 13,000 years when the Indians were there, when Lenape were there. It's a balance. Sure, you want more people to explore it and see it and preserve it, but you don't want it to become overrun. And so it's that balance I think we need to achieve.
So I'll build on Senator Denneman's comments. So I have a full vision for this wonderful part of the county. I would like to see the buildings fully restored, and the Welsh Baptist Meeting House, which Seth Hinshaw, one of our architectural historians, takes great issue with the fact that Rhode Island claims the oldest Welsh Baptist Meeting House in the United States. And Seth thinks, based on his research, they've mainly rebuilt their Welsh Baptist Meeting House. So he thinks we have it. And I think that I would love to see it open to the public. Somebody mentioned this new concept of heritage centers throughout the county. We're building them in the Brandywine Battlefield right now, but I can't think of a better place to have a center where we can learn about the Mason-Dixon, the development of the Mason-Dixon line, where, I mean, what a great scavenger hunt, Jim, right? All the markers are within, they're on trails, you can access them. That whole fascinating study in surveying and science. And then there's plenty of racy material from the famous wedge, where there was disputed until what, what did we all say?
1921.
Finally, Delaware decided to take that sort of lawless area. But, and you know, we still have people that love to tell the stories about waking up in Maryland and getting their mail in Pennsylvania. But there's this whole, and then Cliff's paper, I think, Cliff, your paper's online, isn't it?
I don't think it's out there yet.
Is it available to the public online? This is a wonderful study that just brings to life this migration pattern, but this whole incredible conflict between Lord Baltimore and William Penn, from what I can tell, just because, you know, kings just sort of went, oh, here, you can have that. And, you know, they sort of drew these sort of light lines on the land, and nobody had bothered to survey it. I mean, there's just endless stories to be learned here. And I think you could have a wonderful recreation, you know, an experience without overrunning the preserve. And then, as Eileen and I keep thinking about down the road, is the tavern, right? Right, Eileen? That we would.
Oh, Lund's Tavern on 896. Yes, that's absolutely
Really
right.
and another wonderful one of Chester County's crossroads,
Yeah.
south of Campbellsville. So this whole area is just waiting, I think, to just be a gem for the residents of Chester County and our visitors.
Well, I would like to say, building on what you all have said, that if funds were unlimited, that beautiful area of the crossroads in the middle of the preserve, the Evans house, starting with the John Evans house, which we all watched with great sadness as it began to decay and there didn't seem to be anything we could do. If money were no object, I agree. I would love to see it completely restored. And I would also add the Sexton's house into that as well, which is, as those who are watching could see, is right across the street from the meeting house. I'd love to see the meeting house restored inside. On the outside, it looks very much the way we might expect, but the inside needs a little work to make it more historically accurate, shall we say. But for those of us who did a cleanup years ago in the Sexton's house, there's still some real potential there. And of course, it's all boarded up now, but from the video, you can see that structurally, I only wish that the Evans house could have been as structurally sound as it seems that the Sexton's house is. So that whole enclave down there, to have that completely restored, if money were no object, would just be a dream come true, I think, for all of us. And I just want to say, if time is getting short, if I could make a plea for the people who have been watching and have written in, who have a connection to the Evans house, to the property because of family or a personal connection where they may have lived there, to please leave us some information about how we might be able to stay in contact with you going forward. I think that I can't even express how valuable that would be to us.
Could I ask Eileen or Jim or somebody, would one of you be willing to put out a contact information? Because we are running short on time and we have so many
Right.
questions that won't get answered. Is there somebody who's willing to put out some piece of contact that people could contact you?
Could the township, could people just call the township, Eileen, since they
Oh, they absolutely, yeah, they absolutely could. The township main number is area code 610-255-0388. And they can leave a message. People are working remotely still because of the pandemic. But in addition, would an email be helpful too for the township? Do you think? It's usually with our township secretary? And I have to double check that I get that right. Does somebody else have something they want to say while I do that?
Only that it's
sorry.
important you find a large theme in which to work with. You know, this notion that Jim mentioned of many trails going to the same path, of many eras of history going through the same path. You also have, if you what I found in trying to preserve things and getting money for it, if you can bring it into a contemporary sense. And what you have here is a whole concept of religious freedom, which is being challenged today by some by the growing intolerance that we see within the nation. And so in that vein, you know, you mentioned the Baptist settlements in terms of Baltimore. You also had a string of Presbyterian churches that William Penn brought in. And if you go to all of the boroughs, if we West Grove, Avondale, Kennett, Oxford, you'll always see a Presbyterian church, because that was the other group who came for freedom of religion, and also Penn bought in for in terms of protecting the southern base of the land. So if you I found if you can find the larger themes, then you get all kinds of resources, because you have all kinds of people who are interested, especially if you can do it in connection to something that's a current issue. You're relating history to the present, and it becomes so much alive. And if we could do that and find some ways, and then I think then we get the Commonwealth more interested too. And I think you also, I would urge you to apply to the Museum Commission, the Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission. There are these $25,000 kinds of grants, $40,000, which they'll give you to set up your plans for exactly what you want to do. We've done that in several places in Chester County. For example, the home of one of the Hicksite abolitionists in Pocopson Township recently. So that's another possibility.
Well, Senator, we would be remiss if we didn't thank you and your office for helping us get the grant that we now have for the township, that is going to begin the process for the structural engineering to try to shore up the house. And we can't tell you how much we appreciate that. We really do.
There's always money in the state, and what I've learned to do is be a recycler. I go in at the end of the fiscal year and find out who hasn't used what money, and that's how we got the $10,000. But we do what we have to do. But the Museum Commission has this formal program, because I serve on it from the Senate, and I just simply suggest you apply for one of their grants. It can be a planning grant that can set you help you a great deal in terms of, and I think you would get it based on this history that you have.
Thank you. Thank you.
It would help if everybody knew that the National Park Service, as of October 1st, is working with the DCNR, the state park system, going forward to help lay out a master plan for the total acreage involved, and a master plan to include the historic district.
Well, that's your good work, Jim, and the members of your organization who were able to put that together. Congratulations.
Senator,
Thank you.
we just had a very funny thing happen in New Garden. I was at a public hearing, and there's a house that they're going to list on their historic inventory. And the state of Delaware was actually contesting their right to do it because the house, half of it's in Delaware and half of it's in Pennsylvania. So we had a municipal argument just 4 months ago over this very issue.
Well, the governor was in New Garden Township today, earlier, and that would have been a good story to tell him. But that's one of your keys too. You want to get to the governor. I've been trying to get the DCNR secretary to go and see the village to see what White Clake's all about, and I'm going to continue to do that. What we really have to do is find out a time they're visiting, but they often don't tell us till the day before. But if we find out a time they're in the area, then you connect it up, because once someone sees something and understands through seeing it and experience it, you get a greater commitment.
Well, before we have to go, I will just mention that probably the best way to contact the township for anyone who didn't have a question that got answered, or if you have a connection to the Evans house, and we would so appreciate knowing a little bit more and knowing your contact information, might be to go to the township website, which is www. London Britain Township, all spelled out, and then a -pa.gov. And so we do have a website, and there's lots of confirmation and contact information there that you could get, which would help you. It looks to me, looking at my screen here, that there are still a lot of folks who might have questions that we haven't been able to get to.
I wonder if we could maybe I could ask some questions that they've put in, because there's a boatload of questions. Even though we're at time, I don't know if we can go over time or not, but.
Well, if you could excuse me, because I spend half of my day on Zoom, but I do have to, I'm getting an award tonight, and I do have to show up at least on Zoom for it in about 45 minutes. So it's been a pleasure to be on with you. Thank you for everything all of you have done to preserve this important piece of property. It shows what groups of citizens can do. Eileen, thank you for your years of service as the supervisor there, and and helping make sure that history was preserved. So I think all of you, and I will continue to do what I can in the 6 weeks I have remaining, but even after that, we'll continue to work with you to make sure that we're a success in all this. So thanks, and excuse me as I go off.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
There he goes. Well, if some of us can stay, can we, Tim? We don't really control that. We're panelists. If we can stay, I'm perfectly happy to stay, but I don't know if that's possible.
Yeah, there's still 50 people. Maybe we just do 1 or 2 more questions and then wrap it up, and people can contact the township. Would that be okay?
That works.
It's good for us.
I'm trying to find, let's see.
There's one question. Was John Evans related or a brother of Oliver Evans?
Not as far as I know. I never heard of Oliver. There's a lot of Evans in the area, but I'm not aware of an Oliver.
Oliver invented a very important, he's the father of potentially mass production down in the flour mills in his technique for producing flour, Jim. Hadn't even thought about that. He's probably, anyway.
And that's why I'm not a historian.
Cliff didn't find any evidence.
Well, I mean, the problem with Evans in Chester County, it's the Welsh version of Smith. And then you also have an issue, especially early on, with the Welsh naming patterns. So you basically invert the first name with the last name. So if you're John Evans and you have a son named Evans, then you become Evans John. The son is Evans John, Evans son of John. So they're all intermixed. The farther back you go, there's no way to disentangle them. And then John Evans, the first one that came over here with at least two other Evanses. There's David Evans, who was prominent in the establishment of the Welsh track in Delaware. But as far as their connection to Oliver Evans, it's possible, but it's, you know, it's hard to tell.
Jim, you should put that on your to-do list.
Yeah. You can disentangle them.
That's a really good question. No, you know, it's so funny. No one that hasn't crossed anybody's mind.
Yeah. Well, thinking about the Evans name, I mean, not too far along the lineage of John Evans, isn't there an Evan Evans too, just to make things even more interesting?
That was one of the grandsons.
Grandson, right? Yeah. So not to go too far. We don't want to, you know, that would be like naming yourself Smith, I guess, in the Smith tradition. So.
Tim, anything else?
I think a lot of it is just sharing experiences and stuff. I think maybe we should, this is a good point to wrap it up that I could see. So Suzanne, you want to?
Everybody get in touch with the township. They're the groups. This is a really vital historical commission. They're a really nice bunch of people.
We would love to hear from you. Truly. Thank you so much.
Thanks for everybody's time.
I think Suzanne will wrap it up for us now.
We hope you enjoyed our program this evening. Special thanks to the John Evans Estate panelists and the Chester County Historic Preservation Network, and you, our viewers, for making this program possible. We hope to see you next month on November 19th, live at 5, when we explore the People's Hall of Ercildown. And now our closing slide and video.
We need everyone's help. Thanks for attending. See us next month on the third Thursday, live at 5.